The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
FBI Director James Comey gave about 4 hours of testimony yesterday. Most of it was related to the investigation into Donald Trump and Russia, although it lacked specificity in many cases. Some interesting things we learned from James Comey's testimony. Number one, obviously, in case you didn't know or you weren't sure, the FBI is still investigating ties between the Trump campaign and Russia. Number two, Senator Lindsey Graham directly asked, or actually, as part of number one of the people who asked about this was Senator Lindsey Graham, who said, is the investigation still going on? Comey responded simply, yes. Then, Acting Attorney General Sally Yates, we now have learned, alerted James Comey that disgraced Trump National Security Advisor Michael Flynn had lied about his conversations with the Russian ambassador and could be vulnerable to blackmail. That is a really big deal. It relates to the controversy around the testimony of Yates herself, but it also relates to how early was it at least hypothesized that Michael Flynn is a guy who could have problems surrounding him. Call it baggage, call it toxicity, call it what you want. Further, James Comey was asked, is Russia still now actively trying to influence American politics? The answer was yes from James Comey. And even though it kind of shouldn't have been a major deal, Comey said that what influenced him to go public with the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails was that Bill Clinton met with then Attorney General Loretta Lynch, and Comey felt he had to go out there and prove that the FBI was independent from political influence. Disaster, disaster. We talked before, Pat, about how this meeting between Loretta Lynch and Bill Clinton, it really should not have been a big deal. But whatever level of a deal it should have been, it is a big deal because Comey said that's why he felt he had to go out and say something to try to assert the FBI's independence.
But when he went to the White House, the Obama White House in July to talk about the Trump-Russia investigation and ask if they should go forward in public about that, and the Obama White House said no, maybe he should have kept consistent at that point and not talked about Hillary Clinton's email situation as well.
I want to talk about that consistency because that's a really, really big deal. A couple other things from this hearing. James Comey said that the Justice Department will be going after leakers to try to stop leaks. Comey said that he doesn't care what Donald Trump says about him. Just before Comey's testimony, late Tuesday night, Donald Trump tweeted, quote, FBI Director Comey was the best thing that ever happened to Hillary Clinton in that he gave her a free pass for many bad deeds. Comey brushed it off during this testimony, saying he didn't give Hillary Clinton a free pass. And then we really got to the bit of this that made serious headlines, which is when it was proposed to James Comey that his decision to go public about the Hillary Clinton investigation prior to the election, but not to go public about the Donald Trump Russia investigation prior to the election may have influenced the outcome of the election. Comey said he felt mildly nauseous.
This was terrible. It makes me mildly nauseous to think that we might have had some impact on the election. But honestly, it wouldn't change the decision. Everybody who disagrees with me has to come back to October 28th with me and stare at this and tell me what you would do. Would you speak or would you conceal? And I could be wrong, but we honestly made a decision between those two choices that even in hindsight, and this has been one of the world's most painful experiences, I would make the same decision.
I like that. This decision that he made, which could have completely thrown off the course of the United States of America through the election of Donald Trump. The fact that he might have had a role in influencing the outcome, it made him mildly nauseous.
And the thing is that people would criticize him for concealing the Hillary Clinton investigation, but those critiques would be flaccid in the sense that he was also not publicly talking about the Donald Trump investigation.
That's what I want to deal with next, right? California Senator Dianne Feinstein, during the hearing, asked Comey, why did you treat the investigation so, quote, dramatically differently? Okay. And James Comey said, I didn't treat them differently. He said the FBI confirmed that there was an investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails. and said no more until the investigation was closed. And similarly, Comey said, we revealed that there's an investigation into Russian efforts to influence the election of Donald Trump months after that investigation was opened, and we're only going to talk about it again once it's been closed. Of course, the key difference is, yes, eventually James Comey admitted to the existence of both investigations. Both investigations were taking place before the election, but only one of the investigations was mentioned before the election. I mean, as I was watching Comey say this, I was laughing or crying, I don't know which one. He said, listen, I did the same thing. We did 2 investigations, and I mentioned 2 investigations. Yes, but one of those investigations you mentioned after Trump had already been elected. That is not exactly treating the situations the same way.
I think he is an honorable man and is serving a decent job as FBI director overall.
Interesting.
But he made the wrong decision here.
So you don't believe that. And you know what? I have to say, I actually don't know that what he did was ideologically motivated. That doesn't mean that there was no foul play in the forces that may have ultimately influenced James Comey to announce the Hillary Clinton investigation before the election and the Trump investigation only after the election. But I am getting the sense from this testimony that he was not personally ideological, sort of that he was, I don't want to necessarily use the term bamboozled, but that he was manipulated into mentioning one investigation before and the other one only after.
Yeah, there's definitely conflicting things here. We know that James Comey is also a Republican, but it seems like both parties at some point or another have criticized him for giving preferential treatment to one side.
Long story short, that explanation from Comey that, hey, we treated them the same way because we mentioned both investigations, November 8th, and whether you did it before or after, has a pretty big role to play in whether you treated these situations the same way. Hillary Clinton also made a public appearance about 48 hours ago, commented on why she believes she lost the 2016 presidential election. She said she does take personal responsibility for the loss, but there were other factors that she also blamed. Let's take a look at a little bit of Hillary Clinton's appearance.
It wasn't a perfect campaign. There is no such thing. But I was on the way to winning until the combination of Jim Comey's letter on October 28th and Russian WikiLeaks raised doubts in the minds of people who were inclined to vote for me but got scared off. And the evidence for that intervening event is, I think, compelling, persuasive.
One can still take personal responsibility, but point to particular factors that might have swung the election. But my question is this: should it even have been so close that 77,000 votes in 3 swing states could have swung the election? And the answer is no. And part of it is that Hillary Clinton was such a hampered candidate by her personal history. Part of it is that we know that the DNC was helping Bernie Sanders not be the nominee and helping Hillary Clinton be the nominee. And that is something that did not play well with many Sanders supporters, although ultimately most of them did vote for Hillary Clinton in the end. Given that it was so close, I agree with Hillary Clinton. It's hard to argue that the Comey letter didn't have an impact, that Russian hacking didn't have an impact. We're only talking about 77,000 votes in the end. Now, is this a compliment or a criticism of Hillary Clinton? It's neither per se. It's the reality. Is she taking enough personal responsibility, Pat? I don't know.
It's kind of like a basketball game that goes to the score of 99 to 100 and someone misses the shot at the buzzer. I mean, everyone's going to focus on that last shot, but really what happened in the second quarter affected the outcome just as much.
That's the perfect analogy. Her economic message was not a particularly strong and compelling message. Neither was Donald Trump's, but Trump's message tricked more people. Hillary Clinton's didn't. It was, generally speaking, a campaign that felt incredibly orchestrated to the point of a total lack of authenticity, no doubt about it. But the bottom line at the end is Trump was a terrible candidate, and it is shameful that 77,000 votes could even swing it. But Hillary Clinton is not wrong. It's true, and it's been corroborated, that Comey's letter was perfectly timed. I'm not saying deliberately timed, but it worked out that it was perfectly timed to do the most possible damage to Hillary Clinton. And we're only talking about 77,000 votes.
And this really was Hillary Clinton's election to lose, not only because the DNC coronated her as the candidate, but also many other factors. Just the way the electoral map was set up, that was in her favor. The fact that there was a very popular incumbent president, the fact that the economy was in a good position. This really was hers to lose.
I completely agree with you. But for everybody who's responding to this video by just insulting Hillary Clinton and saying what she's saying has no merit, it's not crazy to mention that you might have partially been influenced negatively in your election as president of the United States by possibly illegal foreign interference that favored the eventual winner. I think it's perfectly legitimate to point to that. But she says she's also taking personal responsibility. And if you lost to Donald Trump by only 77,000 votes in 3 states, and of course won by millions of votes nationally, there's certainly some personal responsibility to take there.
It's one of those things where she's right, but it just comes off as sour grapes, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I get reacting and saying Hillary Clinton never should have even been in this close of a race with Trump. I get that. But at the same time, I don't get the reaction of saying the factors she's mentioning played no role whatsoever. Clearly they did. And, you know, if she had won with the margin that if Donald Trump had won with the margin of victory electorally that Barack Obama won with in 2008 or 2012, then I'd be saying, you know what? I don't think James Comey's letter made a difference. I don't think Russian interference made a difference. But we're talking about a very slim margin in just 3 states.
And this is also bracketing the entire conversation that Hillary Clinton was not the most electable candidate in that Democratic pool.
Yeah.
I think just given the poll numbers months ahead, Bernie Sanders would have killed Donald Trump in the general election.
You think that?
Even Jim Webb and Lincoln Chafee would have stood a better chance, I think.
I don't know about that. And it's not, I'm trying to not go by my visceral opinion, my just intuitive reaction, but just trying to go by the data. I think that it's definitely fair to say that Bernie Sanders would have stood an absolute strong chance against Donald Trump the way that Hillary did. Again, she got millions more votes and ultimately lost by 77,000 votes in 3 states from an electoral perspective. But I'm not as confident as some that say Bernie would have crushed Trump. I've just not seen evidence to support that.
The thing is, we never really know, because if the election matchup was Donald Trump versus Bernie Sanders, the conversation would be entirely different.
The debates would have been different.
Sanders yeah,
no doubt
everything
about
would be different.
Send me your thoughts. I'm on Twitter at @dpakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. We've got a heck of a show coming up for you today, Pat.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's member of the day is Katie Steinman Strong. Katie, thank you so much for being a David Pakman Show member. This is your show in the sense that we depend on and are mostly funded by support from our audience, the podcast listeners, the television audience, the YouTube audience, etc. And you can sign up for membership, support the work we're doing at davidpakman.com/membership. There's also a coupon code available. I voted 17. You can also make a pledge on Patreon at patreon.com/davidpakmanshow. Even if it's just $1 or $2 a month, it still helps the work that we're doing. And of course, if you ever shop on amazon.com, you can type into your browser davidpakman.com/Amazon whenever you shop, and everything you buy will send us a little kickback. All 3 methods of support equally appreciated. I was browsing the David Pakman Show Reddit forum this morning at davidpakman.com/Reddit. Let's go through some of the interesting posts on the Reddit discussion forum, which I encourage you to sign up for and participate in. First and foremost, there's a audience member on our Reddit who says, "We have had a great president every century so far. We are going to have a great president this century as well. What are your thoughts?" And there's a pretty interesting discussion going on. My immediate reaction when I saw that, Pat, was, yeah, it's not going to be Trump. That's not going to be the great president of the 21st century. But could it be in 2098?
Yeah.
Or will it have been President Obama? I don't know who the great president of the 21st century will be.
So the 18th century had George Washington. The 19th century had Abraham Lincoln. The 20th century had Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The 21st century, Donald Trump?
I would say so far, it's President Obama. Yeah, so far, of the 2 that we've had so far.
3.
Oh, right. Well, yeah.
And even Bill Clinton a little bit.
Even Bill Clinton. Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, no, I completely was off in my head there. Yeah. Well, it's certainly not George W. Bush. That I can say with certitude. Okay, also from our Reddit discussion forum. Human nature and recent evolution. A very detailed and thoughtful critique of our recent discussion about whether currently humans are shaped by society or biology. In other words, have the changes we've seen to humanity over the last 5 to 10,000 years, can they be attributed to society and culture or to some kind of physical evolution? A very, very thoughtful comment about that. Good conversation to participate in. Also from the Reddit discussion forum, a viewer asking, is there a Spanish language equivalent of the David Pakman Show? I've not seen one so far. No. And there have been suggestions that I should start doing segments in Spanish. And the logistics of it are a little bit complicated, but I'm sort of up for considering it. But I think the question is more, is there an entire show that is like the David Pakman Show in Spanish? There probably is. It's just not one that I'm familiar with. There must be, right?
Well, especially because we deal with American politics, I don't think it would make too much sense to do the show in another language.
I think the question, though, is this style show, not necessarily, it doesn't have to be about American politics necessarily. With so many Spanish-speaking countries, I'm sure there are sort of like independent type shows in Spanish talking about politics, right?
We'll have to be on the hunt for that, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. In my home country of Argentina, I'm sure there are many. The ones I watch are mostly older hosts. But anyway, we're starting to get into the weeds here. But there's a discussion going on about that. Okay. I sort of jokingly talked about my experience at a nightclub in Las Vegas and going to a chain smokers performance and blah, blah, blah. There were responses on Reddit, one of them being the one that's up on the screen right now, that sort of call me out for not understanding anything, like starting to be out of touch with what is happening in popular culture and blah, blah, blah. What I think people don't get, Pat, is sometimes the entire segment is sort of sarcastic. It's like, yeah, I know that clubs are expensive and I know about bottle service and blah, blah, blah. I sometimes just jokingly pretend to be out of touch. And don't worry, I will soon actually be out of touch with what's going on. But I don't think I'm yet out of touch. It's just the entire segment is sort of a goof. You know what I mean?
Well, that's great damage control, but I think the viewer is right here in that this proves that you're not a millennial.
Yeah, he says that my millennial credentials are in question. Okay, so anyway, people complaining about that. And then lastly, does anyone watch InfoWars? And I've said before, I do watch Alex Jones and InfoWars, and I commented on this thread a couple minutes at a time, but it is purely for entertainment value. I mean, it is so interesting to me to turn it on and to see people shilling for, male and female vitality supplements and all sorts of pseudoscience and unproven conspiracy theories. It is very entertaining. I'm not watching it to be informed about anything.
Every now and then I tune into Jim Bakker's show, but the problem is it's just one long infomercial every single day. They're always selling bonus buckets and purified water, everything else.
What show was it that bought some of the bonus buckets and actually tried to cook the food and it was a disaster?
Oh, I don't know. I know the Drunken Peasants have talked about doing that.
Oh, yeah. I would do it. Like, we could order it, but I think it's been done, so I don't know how fun it would be. Plus, if they didn't have it, do they have vegan fare?
I would hope so. I mean, if you're talking about food that has to last for 20 plus years, you'd think it would have to be vegan, right?
I don't know. If it's dehydrated, who knows? Let's say, what do I care about Jim Bakker's bonus buckets? Anyway, we should look into the food prep thing and see if we can do something around it.
And even if we don't eat them, they can be used as a table. There's many different functions for these bonus buckets.
Hey, so a lot of people called my attention, Pat, to Morning Joe on MSNBC. And they said, hey, Morning Joe Scarborough, seems to be on board with what you said about Donald Trump's mental state, David. So the background is, months ago, we did a story about at what level is Donald Trump reading. It appeared that the guy could barely read above a 3rd or 4th grade level. And then subsequently, on March 30th, I believe it was, we did a story about Donald Trump's cognitive state. Is he showing some of the early signs of dementia or Alzheimer's? And we did a pretty detailed report about this. The last 48 hours, as well as the string of interviews that Trump did around the 100-day mark, are fueling the concerns of many people that there is something seriously cognitively wrong with Donald Trump. Tons of people emailed me saying, David, does Joe Scarborough, host of Morning Joe on MSNBC, watch your show? Because now he's talking about Donald Trump's mental state. Let's take a look at the video from Morning Joe.
I want to talk about what's happened over the past 24 hours. Presidential historian Doug Brinkley said, described the president's confused mental state.
Yeah.
I saw the transcripts from just the rambling, talking about Andrew Jackson and the Civil War. And we've seen him try to bluff his way through things before. But you take that and John Dickerson, it was really shocking. With Dickerson, he was mumbling, he was rambling around, incoherent.
We have that. We'll show it to you.
And then just sort of quit talking.
I don't know.
Walked off.
Do we
have the Dickerson tape lined up? So while we're getting that, John Meacham, we of course can ask you the easy question about Andrew Jackson. Obviously he was wrong about Andrew Jackson and the Civil War by a matter of about 15 years. I want to ask you the more difficult question. Do you follow Douglas Brinkley in your assessment that the President of the United States certainly over the past 48 hours has appeared to have a, quote, confused mental state?
I doubt Joe Scarborough watches our show. He might, I don't know for sure. But yes, we've been on this story for more than a month. Remember our story from March 30th? Here's just a few seconds of it. I want to give you some background on this next story I'm going to talk about. A lot of people have been emailing me saying, David, you know, what you've identified as Donald Trump's lack of comfort in reading may actually be part of a broader cognitive decline that Donald Trump might be experiencing, some kind of early stage dementia or Alzheimer's, and that may actually be what's behind the erratic behavior, the obfuscation, the weird rants with very limited, seemingly limited vocabulary. And I received a blog post yesterday from a blogger who goes by the name of the Neurocritic, who has outlined the case quite specifically for Donald Trump suffering from some kind of cognitive decline. So needless to say, you can check out the entire video on our YouTube channel. It's about 8.5 minutes long. The point is, people are clearly waking up to this reality. Donald Trump is clearly narcissistic. He's clearly paranoid. He's clearly histrionic as well as delusional. But those are sort of characteristics cited colloquially. It's not really a diagnosis of any kind. This is not a surprise, though. This has been the case and pretty obvious with Donald Trump for a year and a half. And in addition, Trump's incompetent, but that's sort of a different story altogether. The Republican Party is going to stand behind Trump, and it could be for years, unless he does something so egregious that they might say, well, we've got to look at the 25th Amendment, invoking the 25th Amendment to get Trump out of here. He'd have to start calling the interviewer racial slurs. Or, I mean, the fact that he's clueless can sort of be muddled with the fact that he's unstable. And unless he really goes out of his way and for example, calls a black interviewer the N-word or something like that, I think Republicans are basically going to stand behind the guy.
Especially because Trump's doctor, Harold Bornstein, is not going to admit that Trump has one of these conditions.
Yeah.
And I also think that it's going to be a very sensitive topic for reporters to go after him on, because if you're dealing with, you know, some sort of disease or a mental health issue,
absolutely,
it's going to have negative repercussions to some of these people's careers, so they may not even touch the issue out of
not only that,
issues.
It could be seen as offensive in some way, right? If you don't deal with it, because it's not something to make fun of if someone has dementia or Alzheimer's or cognitive decline. If it's the president of the United States who's deciding who do we bomb and who do we go to war with, and they're experiencing cognitive decline, it's significantly newsworthy, but it wouldn't be something to make fun of. And we've got to make sure that in the discussions of it, and I think we're doing a perfectly fine job of it, we're not saying that it would be something to laugh at if that were the case. It would just be very disturbing and concerning.
Yeah, if you have a disability, there's certain occupations that you can't hold.
Yes.
Certainly when you're dealing with the most powerful man on the entire planet, there should be, you know, different qualifications for that job, more so than just, are you old enough? Have you been living here long enough? There should be better tests than that. No
doubt about it. And we will see who else jumps aboard this train. Joe Scarborough from MSNBC, the most recent to do it. Hey, we've been talking about Donald Trump's recent friendly behavior with regard to a number of different violent dictators and extremist regime heads. This includes Kim Jong-un from North Korea, who Donald Trump recently again praised, saying he's a smart cookie and that he'd be honored to meet him. But also another one of those foreign leaders was Rodrigo Duterte, the president of the Philippines, who has supported the barbaric extrajudicial killings of drug users and drug dealers in his country. He's admitted to having murdered multiple people while he was mayor of a town in the Philippines whose name I forget right now. The alt-right likes to talk about people being cucked, Pat. As you said yesterday when we were chatting about this, Donald Trump has actually been cucked here by Rodrigo Duterte. Donald Trump praised Rodrigo Duterte, said he had a great conversation with Rodrigo Duterte, and then said he would be honored to have Rodrigo Duterte come to the White House. And Rodrigo Duterte has said, no thanks. I will not be coming to the United States to meet with the president of the U.S. I'm too busy to do that. I think Trump was cucked here in the colloquial sense of the word.
And I think the reason why Rodrigo Duterte decided not to attend this White House visit was because that would reflect badly on his native population. The Filipino people are not in support of Donald Trump. Around the election, they asked, The Economist asked different countries how they would vote if there were voters in the United States presidential election. And the Philippines had 65% for Hillary Clinton and around 13% for Donald Trump. So he is not popular there.
Not looking particularly good, yeah. The country that has the admitted mass murderer as president is saying, yeah, Trump's just too extreme for us. We don't like the guy. So this is total backfire for Donald Trump, right? He sends an invitation to just a brutal, brutal world leader, admitted mass murderer, which confirms that Trump has no standards whatsoever when it comes to who he's willing to invite to Washington, who he's willing to praise, who he's willing to be friendly with on the international stage. And then now it makes Trump look even worse because the guy rejected the invitation. And some might say, hey, listen, Duterte's a world leader. There's a lot going on in East Asia right now, and he's busy with the foreign leaders over there. But that doesn't really appear to be the case. As Pat is pointing out, it seems that the Filipino people have a genuine dislike for Rodrigo Duterte. And I mean, this is just a dramatic backfire for Trump, right? Praising the guy, saying he likes what Duterte is doing to rid the country of the war on, the problem with drugs. And then the guy's not even willing to come to the U.S. to meet with Donald Trump.
And invitations, I'm sure, get rejected all the time because maybe these other world leaders are just too busy or it just doesn't fit their agenda at the time. But maybe that's why you shouldn't make the invitations in public like this.
Yes, indeed. For Trumpists for whom projecting strength is important, how on earth does getting turned down by the leader of the Philippines project strength at all? I mean, Donald Trump is shaping up to be an incredibly weak president in just about every way. And of course, he's doing the penis-size contest equivalent of international diplomacy, which is starting to send rockets and bombs to different places, but really not projecting strength in any way.
Well, both these guys have outrageous proposals for solving the drug epidemic in their respective countries. For Rodrigo Duterte, that means encouraging vigilantism and for people to go out there and kill drug dealers and users. And for Trump, it means building a border wall because, of course, Trump thinks that the wall will stop all drug inflow to the country.
He has been talking about how he is going to stop all drug problems by allowing the free roaming killing of both dealers and users who have not even been confirmed to be dealers or users. So anyway, we can tell a lot about Trump based on the people that he's been praising around the world, can't we? Big discussion about this on our Reddit discussion forum, which you can find at davidpakman.com/Reddit.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to be joined today by Gordon Lafer, who's Associate Professor at the Labor Education and Research Center at the University of Oregon. He's the author of the book, The 1% Solution, How Corporations Are Remaking America One State at a Time. Such an important issue, Gordon, and I think many people in our audience would, of course, be familiar with Citizens United and the way that has impacted money in politics in the United States. But your book makes the case that there is just so much more beyond Citizens United that is impacting how corporations are increasingly in control of different aspects of American society and government. Let's start there. I mean, what are some of the ways outside of Citizens United that over the last 5 years we've seen a move towards corporate power?
Well, I mean, I think everybody knows Citizens United let there be unlimited money spent in politics, but For one, I think too much attention has been paid on individual billionaires when the real money is with the big corporations. And what this book tries to say is like, so what are they doing now that they're allowed to spend unlimited money on politics? What are they doing with that influence? And what they're doing, unfortunately, is trying to make themselves richer and lower the wages, the benefits, and the rights on the job of almost everybody else, both union, non-union, public employees, private sector employees. They're working to lower the minimum wage, to do away with the right to paid sick leave, to cut unemployment insurance. A lot of things that many people don't pay attention to until you run into it in your personal life, but that really affect many, many aspects of our economic lives.
And before we dig in more specifically to some of the instances that you mentioned, what metrics can we look at the economy level that reflect what has been going on over the last 5 or even more years along these lines? I mean, can we look at, certainly you mentioned the minimum wage. What about income and wealth inequality? I mean, is that a macro indicator that tells us how this is affecting our society, or what indicators can we look at?
Absolutely. I mean, America has been becoming a more unequal country for 40 years, and I would say life has been getting harder for a majority of people in the country, slowly but steadily, for about 40 years. If you look at the share of all income that goes to people who work as opposed to the owners or investors in companies, that's been declining, and in 2010 hit its lowest point ever. For men, 60% of men now have seen their wages fall in inflation-adjusted terms over the last 40 years. A quarter, I mean, just to take the minimum wage as in a long term, 1/4 of all people in the country now work for less than what the minimum wage was in 1968. And that means over $100 billion a year that is taken out of the pockets of the people who do the work and given to the people who own and invest just because of the power of their politics. So there are a lot of ways to measure it, but it's a lot of money. It's a big impact in individuals' lives, and it's a big impact for the country as a whole.
Let's dig into one aspect of this that you talk about in the book, which is the privatization of public services. And this is one that, correct me if I'm wrong, is particularly noticeable at the state rather than the federal level?
That's right. I mean, everything that I've studied is at the state level because Congress is mostly deadlocked. They pass a few big bills a year, but thousands of bills a year get passed in the states. And the states have power over a lot of our lives. And the corporate lobbies have more power in the states than in the federal government because nobody's really paying attention. Most people are bored by state politics. But a lot of poor working class and middle class families rely on things like public transportation to get to work or school or shopping at an affordable rate, public health services from county and city officials. Libraries, 2/3 of libraries are the only place in their communities where you can get free internet access. And of course, public education. And all of those things have been cut drastically, and cut not because there was a budget crisis, but because the corporate lobbies pushed bills to cut them. And some of that is in order to enable tax cuts for themselves. And we've seen, for instance, in Ohio, in 2011, Ohio eliminated full-day kindergarten for all kids in Ohio. And at the same year, they eliminated the inheritance tax, which only ever affected the 7% richest families in the state. So we've seen a lot of things like that, taking money away from public services that people depend on into the hands of the most privileged.
We've been talking about the so-called tax proposal from Donald Trump, which was really just, a page of bullet points that were lacking a lot of detail. But to the extent that it was a plan, one of the areas where it seems to me that corporations have been hugely successful in crafting the narrative around taxation is the corporate tax rate, which of course is so drastically different from the effective tax rate paid by corporations. Talk a little bit about that. I mean, we often hear from corporations, we have one of the highest tax rates in the world in the US at 35%, corporate tax rates. But that ignores all of the mechanisms through which the effective tax paid can sometimes be zero or even negative.
That's right. I mean, America has one of the highest official, kind of formal tax rates on corporations and one of the lowest actual effective rates of what people pay, of what corporations pay. And that has meant a couple things. One thing is defunding of public services. Another is if you look over time at of all of the taxes that come in to pay for public services, how much is paid by corporations and how much is paid by individuals and families, the share paid by individuals has gone up and up and up as corporations have grown big departments of accountants whose whole mission is to minimize how much they contribute to public services. And so you get people, individuals who end up kind of with anti-tax feelings because they feel like I'm paying more and more and getting less and less for it. And they're right. Their conclusion may not be right, but they're right that that is what's happening. It's happening because the corporations are getting out of paying their taxes.
Let's talk a little bit about populism. I mean, the 2016 election was interesting in that we had populist sounding messages from both Republican and Democratic candidates. Of course, Bernie Sanders advocating what I would call progressive populism, and Donald Trump quite the opposite, a regressive populism. But you've talked about how corporate strategy has actually been at least partially shaped by the sort of populist sounding rhetoric of elected officials. Talk about that a little bit. In what way could we see that?
Well, for one thing, I think that, we're at a time now when there's long-term downward decline, economic decline. It creates a lot of rage, a lot of insecurity, a lot of anxiety, and that makes politics very chaotic and combustible. So, I think that we're at the point where the neoliberal politics of saying, well, we're going to have people who are investment bankers or come from hedge funds, but they're a little bit nice, so they care about something, is over. I mean, not to say nobody can ever win an election like that, but we saw both in the Republican and Democratic parties that life has just gotten too hard in America for people to be satisfied with those kind of candidates. And then that sentiment of wanting something to change, of being angry, can split either right or left. What we see when you look at what the corporate lobbies are doing, corporate lobbies have a lot of power, but what they have failed to do is to convince most people that their ideas are good ideas. So you see a majority of both Republicans and Democrats in favor of raising the minimum wage, in favor of a right to paid sick leave, in favor of fair scheduling for people who are hourly workers, wanting smaller class size for their kids and better trained teachers, a right to health insurance, a whole lot of things. The corporate lobbies see this and they're scared by it. And I think they try to do two things. One is to get the anger and anxiety to be channeled in some direction other than themselves, whether it's private sector workers against government workers or citizens against immigrants or however you have it. But the other is they're trying to restrict our ability to vote on things. What you see in state after state where they have the power is corporate lobbies passing laws at the state level that say, we're going to take away your right to decide at the city level whether you want to have a higher minimum wage or a right to paid sick leave or something like that, that they're trying to restrict the amount of the economy that citizens can have democratic control over.
How different is corporate strategy depending on whether the context is a left-wing or right-wing populism? I'd be curious to know, because we know that from the political point of view, you can have a populist message that is a very right-wing message, as we've seen from Donald Trump, which scapegoats the other. It presents him as the only and most direct path to a solution or improvement to the problem, et cetera. But if we step back from this and look at it from the corporate perspective, can corporations do really well, whether it's under left or right-wing populism, or does it make a difference?
I think that they don't do well under left-wing populism. And under right-wing populism, they're walking down this path, but they're playing with fire, and I think they know it. I mean, it was interesting that all of the big corporate lobbies were opposed to Donald Trump. And basically every other candidate except him was dependent on corporate money and did what they wanted. And what they wanted, which didn't work, the corporate design for the Tea Party starting in 2010 was to have a mobilized conservative base that was only mobilized around anti-tax and anti-government and economic liberty, and get rid of all the social issues which the money people thought were losers politically. So if you look at the Tea Party platform, a lot of people involved in the Tea Party may have been anti-immigrant or anti-marriage equality, but their platform was only about economic issues. That's what the Koch brothers were trying to engineer with the Tea Party. And then Trump hijacked it and made it both, in some ways more populist on economic messages and much more right-wing on anti-immigrant, anti-woman, anti-Muslim, all kinds of things. And it's dangerous. And I think it's dangerous even for the corporate lobbies. But the more dangerous time, I think, is going to come in a few years, because Trump basically ran on the promise of providing decently paying jobs for people without college degrees. If that dawns on people that that's not happening in 2 or 3 or 4 years, his only move is going to be to double down even more on whipping up white nationalist frenzy. And I think that by that time, the progressive populists need to have organized enough of the people who put faith in Trump for helping working class people to move on to a more progressive platform.
We've been talking about the book, The 1% Solution, How Corporations Are Remaking America One State at a Time. And we've been speaking with the book's author, Gordon Lafer, who's associate professor at the Labor Education and Research Center at the University of Oregon. Gordon, thanks so much for talking to us about this.
Thanks very much for having me.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We're really living in a bizarro world. I was watching the White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer yesterday, and he said that it's, quote, somewhat sad that people are still talking about the presidential election, which is weird since Donald Trump has talked about it every day over the last week and on nearly 40% of all days since the November election. Here's Sean Spicer yesterday.
But you play a game 4 quarters, you play an election until election day. So, well, with all due respect to her, that's not how it works. You don't get to pick the day the election's on. It's set by the Constitution. The president won 306 electoral votes, and I think there's been plenty of analysis on the election and where people chose to spend their time and their resources and their messaging. And I think it's somewhat sad that we're still debating why the president won in the fashion that he did.
Just recently, during a Reuters interview, Donald Trump passed out maps of the election results to reporters. 2 days ago, Donald Trump sent out a tweet which said Trump-Russia story was an excuse used by the Democrats as justification for losing the election. Perhaps Trump just ran a great campaign. Trump also mentioned the election the day before that and the 5 days before that. And on more than a third of the days since the November 8th election, Donald Trump has mentioned the election results. That's just on Twitter, based on a Washington Post analysis of Donald Trump's Twitter account. On 68 of the 176 days since November 8th, Trump has mentioned the election win in some way, shape, or form on Twitter. And then, of course, there's all of the times outside of Twitter where he has done it. Why is Trump so obsessed with the election results? Could it be because, as I've been saying for months, Donald Trump never wanted to be president. He just wanted to win the election, period. He spent 10 minutes reminiscing about the election win at his last rally. We don't even know why he's having these rallies. He sounded, you know, Pat, the kid you went to high school with, who now is still talking about that time he bullied someone or won a fight or something like that. And you're kind of like, we're adults now. Is there nothing else to talk about at this point?
I honestly think that Donald Trump would be happier had the roles switched, in that Trump had won the popular vote and Hillary Clinton assumed the presidency by the Electoral College, because he sees it as a popularity contest, and he can't get over the fact that he lost the popular vote by 3 million.
Right. If Trump had won the popular vote by 3 million, but lost the electoral vote, he could be, number one, not having to be president, which, as we figured out, he doesn't really like doing. Number two, he could just be criticizing Hillary Clinton, which we know he really does like doing. Number three, claiming victory in the popularity contest. And number four, still running his businesses, which it seems like what he's really would rather be doing anyway.
And number five, attacking the system as corrupt. And he would be right in that argument.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. Breaking news, though. Sean Spicer actually didn't lie during an answer. He said it's somewhat sad that people are still talking about the election, and he was right about that. Of course, he was including Trump in that.
And I think the funny part is that Sean Spicer had the winning point in that exchange, which is that the election wasn't held on October 28th. Everyone knew all along it was going to be on November 8th, and yet he still managed to create this gaffe on an unforced error.
Trump needs to come up with a second accomplishment to cite, right? Because he can't, how long is he going to cite that he won the election as his main accomplishment? And I know that sometimes he talks about, well, our big win is Neil Gorsuch. The Senate had to literally go nuclear in order to get Neil Gorsuch in there. It's not exactly a major presidential accomplishment, is it?
I've heard Trump brag that he's the first president in decades to get a Supreme Court justice confirmed in their first 100 days. Yeah. That's true, but also that is much more dependent on circumstance, meaning that you need to have an open seat on the Supreme Court to make that happen.
Right. When Republican senators make someone wait hundreds of days simply waiting around for an election. It's very easy to do that in the first 100 days. It's been teed up and waiting for you to just walk up to it with a bat.
And honestly, I could do that. I could look at a list of names and just pick one. That's
Sure.
all he had to do because think tanks had the list provided for him.
Yeah, I mean, just absolutely pathetic that his accomplishments are having won the election and having gotten Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court. A woman has received a federal criminal conviction for laughing at Attorney General Jeff Sessions, and she is facing up to a year in jail. You might remember that during Jeff Sessions' confirmation hearings, Alabama Senator Richard Shelby was talking about Sessions and said that Sessions has a record of, quote, treating all Americans equally under the law, and that it's clear and well documented. And probably because of Sessions' long history with racial issues, his stance on gay marriage, abortion, you name it, activist Desiree Feruz, who was in the room at the time, audibly laughed when Shelby sung Sessions' praises. She was taken out of the room. She was charged and found guilty of disorderly conduct and now faces up to a year in jail. She told the court, quote, I felt it was my responsibility as a citizen to dissent at the confirmation hearing of Senator Jeff Sessions, a man who professes anti-immigrant, anti-LGBT policies, who has voted against several civil rights measures, and who jokes about the white supremacist terrorist group, the Ku Klux Klan. Hearings like these do have rules of decorum, so it's not really a free speech issue per se, but we should at least acknowledge that it's reasonable to laugh when someone says, this man has a history of treating all Americans equally, because that could not be further from the truth. Multiple times he said favorable things about the KKK. His appointment to a federal judgeship was rejected in part because of racial remarks he had made in the past. He's been accused of being racist towards his black colleagues. He called the NAACP a communist, un-American organization. He voted against the Violence Against Women Act. He voted against a program to help women and minorities start businesses. He voted for banning same-sex marriage. He voted against making LGBT discrimination a hate crime. His rating from the ACLU is a 20%. His rating from the NAACP is a 7%. His rating from the Human Rights Campaign is 0.0. Laughing, I think that it would be legitimate to do more than just laugh if someone sings his praises along these lines.
And I think the real issue here is that laughing can be unintentional and involuntary. So you're kind of getting into the realm of thought crimes there. I know sometimes, you know, if you trip over something in the studio, I just can't help myself. I know maybe it's not the right setting for me to laugh,
Sure.
but I have to do it. I can't help myself.
And I trip over things in the studio pretty frequently, actually, as Pat knows. So listen, I'm hoping that at sentencing, this woman gets a month probation or something like that, but a year in prison for laughing at a hearing, this would really be an absolute and total disaster, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and I think that Jeff Sessions making the claim that he's all about human rights and civil rights and equal rights is one of those things that's just so ludicrous that you can't help yourself.
Yeah, I would probably laugh as well. And would I be able to contain it? Maybe. Maybe this woman did not contain her laughter as forcefully as she might have been able to. But this is crazy. This is absolutely crazy. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. The Eggman almost brought to tears, he reported in this voicemail. Take a listen to this.
Dave, Congress gave Jeff Sessions $0 to go against medical marijuana, legal marijuana. That story, it almost made me cry. It filled me with such hope. You just saved it for the after show.
Yeah.
Not fair. Oh, my God. Leave weed alone, Jeff Sessions, please. Shalom, brother.
Yeah, that was a bonus show story, but we teased it on the regular show. And yes, the federal government has said, Congress has said, we're not giving Jeff Sessions money to prosecute the war on drugs against marijuana in states that have legalized medical marijuana.
Eggman's call here kind of reminds me of that viral YouTube video 10 years ago of the person shouting, "Leave Britney alone."
I think that's what it was a reference to.
Oh, okay.
I think, and by the way, Chris Crocker, the kid from the Leave Britney Alone video, big fan of the David Pakman Show.
Oh, I was going to say, I was thinking that maybe he was on the David Pakman Show.
He's never been on, no,
okay.
But he's a big fan.
Really?
Now, do you pronounce it Eggman? I like that. So it's like, instead of like Steve Eggman or something like that. As opposed
or Pakman.
The Eggman.
Yeah. Because you don't pronounce your name Pac-Man.
No, I don't. And it's annoying when people do.
It is annoying. So, Eggman?
I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. So, the Eggman may be known going forward as Steve Eggman. Although his first name's not even Steve, but it has a nice ring to it.
Maybe his first name is Edmund.
Edmund Eggman.
Edmund
I like that. I like that. But anyway, if the Eggman is almost brought to tears, then you know that it's a major, major story. On the bonus show today, the home foreclosure rate is down 85% over the last 8 years. We'll talk about why. Flint, Michigan is putting 8,000 people on notice for tax liens for unpaid water bills. Of course, water that is riddled with lead. And a new study indicates that cats actually seem to like people after all. And we will get Pat's reaction to this explosive and breaking story. And we will find out how, if at all, this affects Pat's feelings about his own cat ownership, about his outdoor cat, which is likely responsible for the deaths of thousands upon thousands of migratory birds, and about pet ownership in general. But we'll talk about that on the bonus show. DavidPakman.com/membership is how you sign up for membership and get instant access to the bonus show. You can use the coupon code IVoted17 if you want. Also, Patreon.com/DavidPakman Show to make pledges of as little as $1 per month. Check it out.
The David Pakman Show at DavidPakman.com.